I wanted to make a video about something that is very important to me and the reason why I got involved in freelance journalism in the first place, combating the rise of right-wing politics, specifically the pipeline towards fascism. But my journalism career, if you can call it that, isn't anything as scary or exciting as what you're seeing. It's more like this.
How to start? I'm hungry. I should get coffee. Coffee would help me think.
But my audience and outreach has been very low. Most of my articles are below 5,000 views. So I had a dilemma of whether taking my time to do such a thing was worth it or not. I mean, it's a pretty saturated market, and there's lots of people that are much more knowledgeable and intelligent than me that can do a far better job at accomplishing the same goal. So after I published about 20 or so articles, I made a pivot toward combining my interest in politics and my love of film and writing. But don't worry, if this is your first video on this channel, I will not exclusively be looking at how film and politics intersect.
I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
In this specific video, I'm going to be taking a look at my own personal anecdotes of growing up in the Florida education system and taking a look at one of my favorite films, Stanley Kramer's Judgment at Nuremberg. The film is 3 hours of masterful filmmaking in every aspect of the word. Every department, from its direction, script, performances, everything is just incredible. Seriously, Maximilian Schell is absolutely terrific in this movie. It's the best courtroom drama I've ever seen. I can't speak highly enough of this film. And I think part of what makes it so damn good is it's not just a retelling of an event which we already know, and it's not a biopic about one of the judges or one of the men on trial. It's dealing with the timeless aspect of the pipeline towards fascism, and how an entire country can fall behind such a ruthless and murderous ideology. It's a look at the human condition, and how people can easily get swept up into radicalization towards reactionary right-wing politics. But before we get started, a quick two things. All of my sources will be in the description below, and I wanted to briefly expand on my accusations of rising fascism. I imagine many people watching this video will think I'm using the term disingenuously to otherize people with an opposing political ideology to myself, or think I'm using the term incorrectly and equating all conservative values with fascism. When I'm talking about sliding down the pipeline towards fascism, I'm talking about people that are slowly becoming more accepting of a dictator or autocratic government that holds race and nation above all else, while forcefully suppressing opposition. A quicker and easier definition I like to use is palingenetic ultranationalism. So, with that said, let's get started. Recently, there was an event in America which spawned from a mass of people going down that pipeline.
Videos like this one, showing an officer being crushed by rioters.
The Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic!
Watching these events unfold and anticipating more far right-wing protests likely had many of us wondering, how could white supremacy and fascism be on the rise in America? And it's pretty simple. It's a result of declining material conditions and America's lacking education system.
Now, sex.
I mean, come on, seriously, just look at this. We often see fascism equated solely with the Third Reich. The history books when I grew up had pictures of military parades of goose-stepping soldiers and a sea of Germans saluting Adolf Hitler. Nazi uniforms usually had, and I'm sorry if I don't pronounce this right, Totenkopf, a menacing skull emblem that was on their collars, and fascism was equated with the formation of a new party or occupied land like the Third Reich and or a subdivision of secret police like the SS. Reading these history books and learning about fascism led me to believe that unless these things were prevalent, and as long as there weren't goose-stepping parades of soldiers and there wasn't a mass of people Sieg-heiling, there wasn't anything to worry about. I thought that everyone associated with the Nazi Party or anyone that was a fascist would certainly be as openly anti-Semitic and nationalistic as Nazis were. I had this idea that they would show up to work in a Nazi uniform, or if a couple was at a restaurant, they would salute Hitler before paying their bill, allowing me to instantly identify them. Pretty stupid, I know, but that's how it's taught. It's framed as if it was a force that was destroyed, laid to rest, and could never rise again. When I was in school, Benito Mussolini was briefly touched upon as one of the leaders of the Axis powers and nothing more. I learned what Mussolini and Hitler did in the war effort, which battles were won and lost, but never about their rise to power. While their actions are important, their rise to power would also be a very beneficial teaching. It's very important to know how it happened so we can stop it from happening again. It wasn't until after college that I found out that Mussolini was arrested for collecting arms to overthrow the government and was released the next day without charges. From there, he was elected to a deputy position in parliament and began instructing fascists to take over local government. He later hatched a plan to march onto Rome and took complete control of the government. Now, knowing this, it's not hyperbolic to compare the attempted kidnapping of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer and the attack on the Capitol building as an attempted fascist coup. Treating it otherwise would be dangerous, as we know Hitler's failed coup attempt, known as the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, resulted in him being charged with high treason, but without punishment. The lack of punishment emboldened Hitler's political views and would later cause him to be elected chancellor. We saw echoes of this as Republican senators and representatives called for the Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump to be dissolved in the name of unity.
But impeaching a former president, a private citizen, is the antithesis of unity.
In Judgment at Nuremberg, Chief Judge Dan Haywood deals with exactly this. He befriends the widow of a Nazi general, Miss Berthow, who shows Haywood around Germany and tells him that Germans just wanted to do what was best for their country, and that everything they did was for their love of country. She explains how the consequences and condemnation from the trials could have lasting effects on the German people, and that many of them were innocent and didn't know of the Nazi Party's atrocities.
We did not know.
As far as I can make out, no one in this country knew.
And that's one of the main thematic questions of the film. Who are we to blame for the rise of white supremacy and fascism? Were these regimes and ideologies uncontrollable and slated to rise to power regardless of what measures were taken? Or is Ms. Berthow wrong and people knew about it but didn't act to stop it? White supremacy and fascism isn't a nebulous ideology or regime that uncontrollably sprouts from the ground and starts taking control over land and getting into positions of government. White supremacy and fascism consumes the people around you. It gains power through propaganda and indoctrination. Your neighbors, teachers, friends, and family start to drift that way slowly over time without you nor them noticing. We usually dismiss our racist relatives at Thanksgiving dinner as harmless and don't count on them turning their words into actions. But who do we blame when these people actually start turning their words into actions? Who do we blame for letting them speak in such an uncontested way for so long? Judgment at Nuremberg suggests that we are to blame. Silence is complicity, and standing in silence in the face of such injustices is siding with the oppressor. And I think that's part of what makes the movie so powerful. The actions of the characters echo the actions of the collective citizens of the nations. Ernst Jauning, played by Burt Lancaster, doesn't speak almost at all for the first 2 hours of the film, representing the silence people had as the Nazi Party slowly gained power.
I was content to sit silent during this trial.
Dr. Ernst Jauning is one of the focal points of the film. He's a lifetime physician who was in the Nazi Party and is credited with many great contributions to medical and historical textbooks. And the reason why he got swept up into the Nazi Party is because he was afraid of losing his career and facing the punishment he witnessed around him. In the film, it's revealed that Jauning was pressured into forging paperwork, tarnishing a reputation he worked so hard for and resulted in an innocent death. So he remained silent and didn't speak out, just like he was doing in the courtroom.
He made a great error in going along with the Nazi movement.
The film contemplates the definition of justice and observes the many ways well-intentioned people can fall in line behind such devastating ideologies. There's a scene where Irene Hoffman, played by Judy Garland, is relentlessly questioned about her secret relationship with a Jewish man, a fictionalized version of the Katzenberger trial. This causes Ernst Jauning to finally speak out. He would no longer stand silent in the face of another injustice, an injustice that he directly caused.
Mrs. Wallner, what else? Hello! Are we going to do this again?
Ernst Jauning, ignoring the advice of his attorney, Hans Rolf, played by Maximilian Schell, takes the stand and pours out his feelings of guilt.
Where were we when Hitler began shrieking his hate in the Reichstag? Where were we when our neighbors were being dragged out in the middle of the night to Dachau? Why did we sit silent? Why did we take part? Because we loved our country.
Hans Rolf represents the idea that we are all to blame. He claims it's easy to condemn one man in the dark, and it's easy to speak out against the basic flaw in the German character that allowed Hitler to rise to such power. He asks, if we are to blame those who were in the party that allowed such injustice to rise, are those who remain silent also to be condemned?
Where's the responsibility of those American industrialists who helped Hitler to rebuild his armaments and profited by that rebuilding? Are we now to find the American industrialists guilty?
And we're seeing echoes of this today. America is responsible for giving Israel billions of dollars worth of military equipment each year, which Israel then uses to commit the ethnic cleansing of And the film does a very good job at making you feel sympathetic towards Ernst Jannings, despite him being aligned with the Nazi Party and having a hand in many innocent deaths. But one of the reasons why people remain silent in the face of such injustices is because they aren't able to properly identify them, or they're disguised behind a love of country. Think of the people that cheer on Israel's bombing of Palestine, the people that support the war in the Middle East or supported the war in Vietnam, despite the war being started on a lie. Think of the people that supported Obama's drone strikes, which killed many innocents, which included tons of children. Think of the people that support putting immigrants in cages, and think of the people that marched in Charlottesville chanting "Jews will not replace us." Think of people that were okay with America overthrowing elected leaders in other countries, such as Evo Morales in Bolivia, because America didn't want Bolivia to nationalize their lithium mines. And think of the insurrectionists that stormed the Capitol and beat police officers with flagpoles while chanting USA as if it was a patriotic feat to pummel cops and hold specific senators hostage while they attempted to overturn a democratically elected president. To them, all of those actions are justified because it was done out of a love of country.
Because we loved our country.
People that start to go down this pipeline often place the blame of their troubles on the wrong things and justify it with their love of country. This is usually because people have been fed false information as to why there is economic inequality and declining material conditions, and they've been lied to about how to fix it. Take a look at Donald Trump. He undoubtedly sparked a ravenous wave of support from a large percentage of American citizens. He used the same populism tactics as Ronald Reagan to fuel his supporters. He claimed he was going to build a wall and isolate America to keep it safe. He was going to return manufacturing to America to increase jobs, and he promised to make America great again. And it's easy to see how people would find this messaging to be very powerful, but we know it's disingenuous. It plays on nostalgia and implies America is no longer as good as it once was. People believe their declining wages and wealth are not because it's by design in the name of profit and to increase capital for capital owners, but rather it's because Mexicans are coming over the border and taking our jobs. They believe manufacturing jobs left America because Democrats want them to, and believe the country they love so much is being ruined because of an increasing support of socialism and communism, despite socialism and communism being things that they likely can't define.
She's a communist. She's left of Bernie. She's rated left of Bernie by everybody. She's a communist. We're going to have a communist?
We see this today with conservative pundits such as Candace Owens, who claim the Nazis were actually the party of the left, because they were the Nazi Socialist Party. She also claimed what Hitler did in Germany was good. It was when he tried to do that stuff outside of Germany where things went bad. She defended him by saying he did what he did because he loved his country.
You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize.
And the film makes fun of exactly this, since it happened then too. Everyone denounces the Nazi Party, but was silent or complicit. In one scene, the prosecution, Richard Widmark, is drunk and angry that everyone around him seems to think they're innocent and they're not aligned with the Nazi Party, and they never were.
There are no Nazis in Germany, didn't you know that, Judge? The Eskimos invaded Germany and took over. That's how all those terrible things happened. It wasn't the fault of the Germans, it was the fault of those damn Eskimos.
A lot of people that go down the pipeline simultaneously legitimize fascist actions but denounce them when pressed.
I do not believe that we should be characterizing Hitler as a nationalist. He was a homicidal, psychopathic maniac that killed his own people.
You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine.
People susceptible to going down the pipeline towards fascism are willing to forfeit democratic principles in the name of their love of country.
What difference does it make if a few political extremists lose their rights? What difference does it make if a few racial minorities lose their rights?
But there's also another reason why people do it. The Association for Psychological Science examined a study about varying wealth gaps. The results suggest that the growth in support for populist leaders who are happy to abandon democratic principles to achieve particular outcomes may partly be due to increasing levels of economic inequality. America has been experiencing record levels of economic inequality that has been amplified by COVID-19. The top 1% own nearly 50% of American wealth. Productivity in the workplace is at an all-time high, while wages remain stagnant. And for the first time in U.S. history, children are doing worse than their parents. Germany had economic inequality in spades after World War I. After the Treaty of Versailles was signed, which caused Germany to have to pay reparations to the Allies, the Weimar Constitution was written. Due to the Treaty of Versailles, hyperinflation plagued the nation. So with these trends and the amplification of these trends from COVID-19, it's easy to see how people would be on board when Donald Trump pointed the finger at Mexicans and called them rapists and drug dealers, and also introduced a travel ban on Muslim-majority countries to, quote, protect the nation from terrorists. Like the movie shows, we forget that a lot of people that get swept up into such an ideology are well-intentioned people that are just desperate for a higher quality of life. And they latch on to someone that claims to hear their cries for help, and gives proposed solutions that, unbeknownst to them, are empty and harmful. And America's education system is mostly to blame, like I said before. The education system has done a tremendous job at teaching everyone to point the finger at things outside of America, rather than inward. America's education system has a lack of critical analysis of exploring the how, and instead explores the what. While I was a recipient of Florida public schools, I'm willing to bet that many of the incorrect things I was taught aren't exclusive to Florida public schools. I was taught the Civil War happened because of states' rights and northern aggression. Only just over half of Americans can correctly identify the cause of the Civil War being slavery. Confederate flags flew at my high school and were attributed to Southern pride, or heritage not hate, despite the flag being tied with the KKK, the Confederacy, and why it's a symbol of the South. I learned that the Founding Fathers were very good slave owners, and that's just how it was back then, despite there being plenty of anti-slavery text at the time. 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell were required readings, but incorrectly analyzed. Orwell's worries of the USSR and Joseph Stalin's authoritarianism, mass media manipulation, and censoring thoughts and speech were equated with conservative principles of being against big government. I was taught this despite Orwell himself being a socialist who volunteered to fight fascists in Spain. I was taught the Bay of Pigs invasion was a result of America attempting to liberate Cuba from Fidel Castro's evil communist regime, rather than the CIA attempting to have Castro assassinated due to him ending relationships with American businesses that weren't favorable to Cuba. The word evil always prefaced these types of discussions. And because of all this, I found myself going down this pipeline, but fortunately I was able to correct my path. Before college, I didn't learn of a single anti-capitalist philosopher or economist. It wasn't until after college where I purposely sought out that kind of stuff that I was introduced to it. The specter of anti-capitalist philosophers and the boogeyman of communism haunts America's education system and is likely why Donald Trump called Kamala Harris a communist. Fear-mongering is incredibly effective, unfortunately.
She's a communist. We're going to have a communist, and she's going to be in it.
If you falsely equate leftist ideologies with communism and falsely spread information about the dire consequences of leftists coming into power and label it as evil, it will draw more people down the pipeline out of fear. This is exactly what we're seeing in Florida, with Governor DeSantis pushing for schools to survey students on their beliefs out of fear of indoctrination. It has echoes of McCarthyism and is a very authoritarian practice in itself. We're also seeing this with the pushback against teaching critical race theory. Another example is that Medicare for All would save $8 trillion over 8 years and increase wages while saving millions of lives, but we kept seeing the word socialism disingenuously framed to fearmonger the idea of socialized healthcare.
And now Joe Biden and the radical left are trying to impose the same system, socialism plus.
In his early days in office, President Joe Biden announced an executive order to rescind the 1776 Commission, which was placed under former President Donald Trump. Trump established the commission as a counter to the New York Times Pulitzer-winning 1619 Project, and claimed America's education system was left-wing indoctrination. The 1776 Commission attempted to omit details about American atrocities, namely slavery, in order to give the country a more patriotic education. The White House released a statement under the Trump administration calling the 1619 Project an attempt to label the country as evil. The attempted revision of history is exactly one of Orwell's fears, and the closest America has gotten to actual fascism in modern history. So, that was kind of a rambling, rapid-fire way to show that the American youth is constantly taught incorrect stuff, and how revisionist history can shape views. History is one of the best teachers. Properly observing and learning about events from our past is the best way to educate our younger generations about how to avoid the same mistakes and prevent people from going down the same pipeline towards fascism. Proper education will help point the finger in the correct direction and place the blame on the institutions and policies that are responsible for declining wealth rather than using specific races or incorrectly defined ideologies as scapegoats. White supremacy and fascism will always be around, whether education is improved or not, but a better education system can quell a lot of its rise. People that feel oppressed for illegitimate reasons will find white supremacist and fascist rhetoric enticing, because it allows them to point the finger at other things than themselves or the institutions in which they belong. The fervor of wanting to be great and increase our material conditions, our wealth, our quality of life will blind many of us to the atrocities committed under the false premise that it's the only way of prospering. And like everyone that goes down that pipeline, it's exactly what Yawning believed. And that's where this line of Yawning quoting Hitler comes into play.
There are devils among us. Communists, liberals, Jews, gypsies. Once these devils will be destroyed, your misery will be destroyed.
The film is great at showing the general attitude of the people and how their attitudes aided their way down the pipeline. The film shows how imperative it is to understand the how, and how it's possible for anyone to succumb to fascism's tightened grip.
The country is in danger. We will march out of the shadows. We will go forward. Forward is the great password. And history tells how well we succeeded, Your Honor.
And that is the exact thematic question the film is warning us of, and what makes the climax so good. Towards the end of the film, Rolf is doing whatever he can to defend Yawning, and as I said earlier, he does a pretty good job and makes some pretty compelling arguments. He implies Hiroshima and Nagasaki are similar atrocities that don't allow Americans to look at them with superior morality.
Thousands and thousands of burned bodies, women and children. Is that their superior morality?
Rolf wants to ensure the German people's dignity is still intact, and that they have the ability to continue to govern themselves after the trial. He admits to making defenses he knows are against his own morality and are in bad faith.
There were things I had to do in that courtroom that made me cringe. Why did I do them? Because I want to leave the German people something. I want to leave them a shred of dignity.
Rolf argues that Yawning standing idly by is actually an act of bravery because he stayed on his post and prevented further damage from being done by preventing someone worse from coming into power. And you already saw what he tried to say earlier about blaming American industrialists. He's fanatical in trying everything he can to defend Yawning because he thinks Yawning represents the average person who stood by idly among rising fascism. And if they did find Yawning guilty, they would have to find everyone guilty, as he said earlier.
Ernst Yanning's guilt is the world's guilt.
And during his fanatical attempt to defend Yawning, Yawning recognizes the problem of making excuses is resurfacing again. He mentions the moment we start drawing lines of who did and who did not know, or making excuses that it wasn't supposed to go that far, is the moment the lesson the Nuremberg trials were trying to tackle would be lost, and going down the pipeline again would be made inevitable. He was witnessing it in real time.
He has done it here in this courtroom. He has suggested that the Third Reich worked for the benefit of people. He has suggested that we sterilized men for the welfare of the country. He has suggested that perhaps the old Jew did sleep with the 16-year-old girl after all. Once more, it is being done for love of country.
And because of this, Yawning sees himself in Rolf, and why Yawning thinks he himself was the worst of all of them.
And Ernst Yawning, worse than any of them. Because he knew what they were. And he went along with them.
In the end, the four fictional characters are found guilty, and Judge Haywood meets with Ernst Yawning because Yawning wanted to ask him something.
Those millions of people. I never knew it would come to that. You must believe it. You must believe it.
Herr Yawning. It came to that the first time you sentenced a man to death you knew to be innocent.
The answer was the answer that he knew from the very beginning, but it was the answer that didn't sink in until this trial. To me, this ending is so powerful because it captures the philosophy and psychology of those who have a hand in the rise of fascism. It's a timeless movie that warns us that anyone is able to go down the pipeline. It's also a warning that we must be cognizant of those around us who are also just as susceptible. It's a reminder that fascism is a danger that is potentially right around the corner, and that we must not remain silent. And if we do, then we are just as guilty. I fear I might not have done a good enough job at exploring this movie's themes and explaining how good this movie is. If this piqued your interest at all, please go watch the movie.